Hello everybody, my name is Bill Cope. Thank you very much for inviting me to this skills forum. I work at the University of Illinois. You might be able to guess that I don't have a central Illinois accent. I actually have an Australian accent, and I work in the area of education, and for the last, well, I've actually been here for 14 years now at the University of Illinois. I've been working in the area of technology mediated learning, e-learning, all those kinds of things. But actually, before I came here, I worked extensively in the area of workplace training. I was director of a centre which dealt with the issues of, in Australia, of industry restructuring and change, which required skills changes and so on. What's happened since I've been here, though, is this world of e-learning and technology mediated learning, which has become so important. So in a way, this presentation brings together two different parts of my career which have been separated for such a long time. So thank you very much for inviting me. The way I'm going to run the presentation is talking between some big picture ideas and some practical examples which illustrate those. And to do that, I'm going to be jumping backwards and forwards a little bit between a PowerPoint presentation and then some stuff on the web, giving you examples of e-learning at work, and then some generalizations back in PowerPoint. So you're going to have to bear with me as I jump backwards and forwards, sharing different screens. So sharing my PowerPoint first, the theme I'm calling Work 2.0. I mean, we want to number things. It's Web 2.0, it's maybe it's Industry 4.0. If we believe the World Economic Forum's theory of these things, it's Klaus Schwab, who is the leader there, who invented this Industry 4.0 thing. But whether it's a 2 or a 4, what's central is digitally mediated communications, artificial intelligence, automation, which involves computers down the back. So, what's happening to work is profound, and it's worth giving it a new number. Same with education, although with education I'm definitely not going to call it 3 or 4, I'm going to call it just 2, because in fact there hasn't been a lot of change that's happened in the way in which we do learning until the day before yesterday, until about now. And what I do as an education professor is I try and think about and imagine what the future of learning would be like. Now in this talk I'm going to talk particularly about the connections between learning and work. But what I'm going to do is start off by talking about what Learning for Work 1.0 was. And where you learn for work is you went to school and you learned some basics. There's an abacus out the front, there's the teacher up on the stage, you're listening hard to what the teacher's got to tell you, and this was a preparation before you worked. And here are the learners sitting dutifully in the classroom while the teacher's up the front. They're doing their work, they're learning. Hopefully it's stuff that's later on going to be useful for work. And here is knowledge. So how do we bring knowledge into the classroom? We bring it in by the textbook, which summarises stuff in the world. There's the chapter about volcanoes perhaps, or something or other, and the student is reading it. And what we do with learning is we remember what the books told us and what the teachers told us. So this is essentially is learning here. Now I've got a cheeky little theory of learning. You see the kid there with their finger on the textbook and their hand on their writing notes. That's essentially a memory technique. And what happens is the knowledge goes through your fingers up one end and up through your arm and crosses between ear and down the other side, and some of it sticks in here while you're learning. So there's a kind of a theory of learning embodied in this. Now this is not learning. Here we've got a little girl in the front seat. She might be daydreaming. Anyhow, I'm going to guess that it's not learning. And soon I discovered that it's definitely not learning, because our learning architectures weren't designed. There are all the tables bolted down on the floor. They weren't designed for these kinds of interactions. And if you like, this is the knowledge model that we had. And I've rather cheekily down the bottom, making the connection with work, says this is the command economy. The boss, the teacher, and there are the workers, and they're not to talk to each other too much. Well, no, this model, which was the traditional hierarchical model of organisations and the traditional model of the classroom, there was a lot of similarities between the logic of work and the logic of the classroom. And then what you did is you did your learning and later on you did your work. You know, you went to school and then you got a job, and there was a kind of a linear process from learning then to work, and hopefully it's transferable. Some of the stuff you've learned in that little classroom, reading and writing and a few things, a bit of math, would be useful later on. And my perhaps cheeky metaphor for this is a front-end loading. So we've got human resources and we've front-end loaded the skills that they're going to need for life, and there's not much that needs to be learned after that once they get into their job, or they learn it on the job. There's a kind of two separate times in life. Now what happens is online learning comes along, and sometimes online learning might be actually in a classroom context. This is online learning in a classroom context. It might be remote, and we've been forced to do a lot of remote lately as a result of this consequence of this COVID crisis. So for me, online learning is not distance learning or remote learning. It could be remote. In fact, it's now a necessary condition for remote, but also it could be using technology-mediated learning in the classroom. And what does it change? What changes here? Well, look, the teacher's still out the front. The kids are still in rows, and they shouldn't be talking to each other. And the most you could do, perhaps, is talk to the kid beside you. So, you know, we sometimes get these technologies, and technology doesn't necessarily mean change at all. Now, what are some of the things we used traditionally in learning? Well, one was the lecture, teacher talk. In fact, that's an old idea as old as St. Benedict and the foundation of the monastery system. There's a very nice quote there from St. Benedict which says, you know, you listen to the master quietly and obediently. Well, on the right here is in fact our Coursera course on e-learning ecologies, where terribly what we do is we reduce exactly what St. Benedict said, which is we hope that everybody doing our MOOCs, and there's a list of videos there and the ones you've done and the ones yet to come, and week 1, week 2, week 3, we hope you sit there and obediently listen to what we say by viewing our MOOCs. So, you know, in a way, some ways, you know, we've got all these radical new changes in education, but kind of nothing changes at all. If I go on now to kind of generalise about that, you know, the teacher listens, the teacher tells and the student listens. The student is really positioned as a knowledge consumer. Here I am consuming this stuff that's being given to me, not a knowledge producer. And it's a transmission model of learning, right? Essentially, it's a delivery model. Something else we did in traditional classrooms is we might have had classroom discussions. So here are the kids all putting up their hands. But in fact, in Zoom, you know, you put up your hand if you want to talk, or there's one person in the chat at a time. So what we've done is we've got all these new methods, but not necessarily a big change. So this is, you know, here are the rules of classroom discussion. One person talks at a time. And in fact, the truth is that's pretty darn boring. In social media, everybody talks all at once. They're all chatterboxes and there's a lot of stuff happening in the feed. But sitting and listening to somebody else, you know, that there are 30 people in the room or whatever, there's only one chance in 30 that you're the person who's going to be speaking, and it's pretty darn boring. It's pretty low cognitive load. And by the way, I'm sure you do this, I know I do it. If I'm sitting in a boring Zoom meeting, one of the great things about Zoom is I can have my emails up on the other side of the screen and I can multitask. You know, maybe it's not totally ideal, but it's because the other thing's boring. But also what we do in these things is when you put up your hand to speak, you're really trying to guess the one answer that the teacher wants to hear. It's not as if there's genuinely going to be an exchange of opinions, because there really isn't the time or the space for that. And then finally, we get to assessment, right? So we've listened to our lectures, we've had our classroom discussions, we've read our textbooks, we've been good little consumers of the stuff that's been delivered to us, and then we go into the exam to see what it is that we've remembered. I'm not going to say learned, I'm going to say remembered, because in fact a test is not really a test of learning, it's a test of memory. And by the way, the definition of of that definition of learning is that it's what you can remember until the day after the test. So now what we do is we now have quizzes at the end of the video, or we've got an e-textbook and there's a quiz at the end of the chapter. And it's the same thing. We're just testing what we can have remembered, what we could have remembered from what's been presented to us. So, remembering facts. In fact, what these kind of tests do is they limit, they're not very good at measuring critical thinking or creativity or innovation or practical application. They're not very good at any of those things, but they're good at being able to evaluate whether you can remember facts, whether you can give correct answers after you've been told the procedure, otherwise known as the formula. But it's not even understanding the formula, it's happening to get the right answer, whether you really understand the formula or not. That's not really possible to measure in those kinds of things. Long-term memory, I just said that. But also it's what's in your head rather than what you can do. And I want to make some contrasts in a second about that as I go on to talk about learning for work 2.0. So I'm talking about learning 2.0 and work 2.0. So a couple of key features that I want to talk about and then give some examples of. One is this notion of collaborative intelligence. So in fact, the hub and spoke model, the old model of learning, was one where, in fact, you were very much on your own. You were sitting and listening to the lecture and then going and remembering what was said. There was a classroom discussion perhaps, but it wasn't really about the exchange of ideas. So what we've got here is a model of learning where there's collaboration going on, and where what the teacher does is not so much tell the student things, transmit things to them, but facilitate learning relationships which are backwards and forwards learning relationships. Now, what I want you to do for a second is also apply this diagram to the workplace and the team leader, right? In a way, the old team leader is that little diagram that I've now reduced as the past, and the modern team leader is somebody who can facilitate collaboration and get the best out of people. And what we do in the work that we do, the web-based environment that I'm about to show you, is we build what we call admin and member roles. So the leader is the kind of coordinator. We don't even want them to be a leader. We want them to be somebody who coordinates and facilitates and holds things together. And there are members in a group, but you do need an admin, right? And you do need a certain kind of leadership in those roles, whether it's the teacher as leader or the team leader as leader. But the other thing is work integrated learning. So remember the front-end loading model, you learn, then you work. And by the way, that applies also to training. You go and do the training course, then you go and apply it. But what I want to talk about is I want to talk about learning that's embedded in work, continuously a part of work, an integral part of work. And by the way, this idea takes us to the idea of the learning organisation and knowledge management. These are key ideas in those spaces. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump out of my PowerPoint where I've kind of introduced these ideas, and I am going to move into now a web space called Scholar. Now just a little bit of background. I've actually been building this, we collectively, our team, I've been involved in building this for nearly 20 years now actually. We started the first version of this web kind of environment in 2000 in Australia. And then in the US, we're now building a third version of this. And it's been done very much with research grants, R&D grants, which in the United States are reasonably generous at the higher ed level. So we've been progressively building this out over a number of years. And it's an experimental model. I mean, we have a not-for-profit where this thing, you can see there the little word pricing. We try to recover some of our costs, but large parts of it, in fact, almost everything I'm about to show you, or a lot of what I'm about to show you, is free. Just log in and do stuff. We do have a mission. We're based in the research park in the university, and our not-for-profit has a vision at some point to cover its costs, the costs of ongoing maintenance and development. But it's not, it's not. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to show you examples of something. And what I mean by that, by the way, is the examples I'm going to show you are things that you can do versions of this in other platforms. So it's not platform dependent. Some of it you can't do in other platforms because other platforms don't do it, but a lot of it you can. So let me jump out now I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to change my screen sharing from the PowerPoint, and I'm going to change the screen sharing now to this web space called Scholar. And I have now logged into Scholar. When I first log in, there are a number of apps across the top, and I'm going to show you through some different things we can do in different ones of these apps. So I start off in an app called Community, which is, if you like, a kind of a hybrid. It does what Facebook and Twitter do. It does what social media does. But social media is a terrible idea for learning because, you know, it's not about friends or followers. We have this notion of peers. It's people who are working together. Followers is even worse idea than friends because it's not a popularity context. It's not about who can get the most retweets or whatever you need to get. But also what happens is you'll see in a moment, we want to have some social media-like features, but also some blog-like features. And we want to have some LinkedIn-like features as well. So there are a number of things we want to take and transform from classical social media platforms. So you can see here I belong to communities. So we don't use the idea of a class. It's a knowledge community who are working together on knowledge challenges and issues. And it might be a group within a class. It might be multiple classes. It might be a team in an organisation which is working collaboratively on a particular knowledge issue. And what I'm going to do is log into a few places. Now, I set up this this community for us to discuss things today and beyond this, the kind of topics that we're talking about today. And when I log in, I can see here an activity stream where there are posts which are a bit more substantial than your normal Facebook post. I'm going to show you an example of one. What we did here was, when I was talking to our colleagues who organised this the other day, we just made a short video where, look, there's too many of me. There's yet another version of me. And what we said is comment below what would you like to get out of the skills forum. So what this does is this begins a discussion below, and I want you all to join this discussion, by the way. Now I've got it here because I want to illustrate a certain number of points about the nature of these discussions. But nevertheless, this is, we're learning by doing if you can do this. But the other thing I've suggested here is to make an update, which is share an example of a skills initiative in your own working environment, an executive initiative in South Africa or beyond. And what's happened over here is, this is just the beginning, but Coral's already made a very interesting post about skilling issues in the context of COVID-19. And by the way, if you're to make an update, what you do is just go to this little menu behind here, and the minute you start that, this suggests the opposite of a tweet. The opposite. In fact, you can make it smaller, but also it's one where you can embed a video from an external site, where you can put in a document if you've got an important document you want to include, and you can write around it. Now, what does this mean? Well, firstly, if I go back to here, that when people start talking, I can do something quite different from the hands up and the Zoom scenario, which is everybody can talk all at once. Everybody can contribute make a contribution. And the minute you do that, it's not just guessing the right answer from the teacher. There are diverse opinions that come out and discussions that can happen. So this is actually replicating classical classroom discourse, but in different kinds of ways. And likewise, when I go to the video here, sorry, I'm jumping about, instead of me giving you a lecture, this is only 4 minutes long, I can make a number of these, and they're meant to begin a discussion. They're meant to bring you in. It's not me just telling you something. It's meaning to bring you into the dialogue, and then it's asking you to contribute content. So you become a co-contributor to the curriculum, a co-designer of what's being learned. So this is an equal partnership. It's not me, the simply standing out the front of a lecture theatre or delivering a video lecture. And this is just an example where, this is from one of my classes where I didn't know about this particular application here. You know, one of the things is we can learn a lot from our students about, and team leaders can learn a lot from team members. So that's the first area that I wanted to show you. I'm now going to go into this second area, but I want to introduce you firstly to this community. This is a project that we were doing for the World Health Organization. And let me tell you, it's about immunisation strategies. There were 95 people from all around the world who were participating in this. And see this little diagram here, this is the, I don't know, I can't count the number now, the 7 things you're supposed to do according to WHO when you're doing an immunisation strategy. And what the WHO would traditionally do is go out there with these experts and bring the PowerPoint and explain the 7 things to people, and they would then go away and do it. Remember, it's the learn model, then work. Learn, then work. It was that model that was at play before. So what we did here, which was different, and I'm going to take you now into this creator space, is we asked them to do an immunisation plan for where they were in the world. So this particular person was in Cameroon, and here what they've done is they've put in a SWOT analysis. Oh, well, here's firstly their editor where they can, you've seen this before, they can put in videos, they can put in media and so on. And as they're doing that, they get to see over here a number of review criteria, which is how they are going to be measured by the instructors and by their peers. So here we've got here, justification of the transformative investment, prioritisation of strategies, with very, very good descriptions of rating levels when it comes to review. So this is the person doing their draft. I'm now looking into their draft. I'm going to now jump to the work that they did, and here is the final version. You can see they've put in a document there, a PDF. They've put in a nice infographic that they got from somewhere. They put in their planning strategy, and so on. So what they're doing is, look, instead of me showing the PowerPoint to these people, yes, we've got the PowerPoint as a framework for thinking about what we're doing with immunisation, but then what we do is we bring our own knowledge to bear on that particular challenge. So this is the plan that was built by this particular person for the work that they do in Cameroon. Now, it goes for review. The person who makes the review drags across this slider. This is a little justification of what a 1 or a 2 or 3 or 4 is. So what we're doing is we're outsourcing assessment. This is collaborative assessment. It's not the test at the end, the checker box at the end of what you've remembered. It's us giving each other constructive feedback because we're going to revise this plan based on each other's feedback. And look, here's the result. This is from one of the participants who gave some very nice comments. This is from another person who gave a whole lot of comments. And by the way, I could jump into the conversation, or the creator could jump into the conversation. So this here is then a peer review process before the work gets finally published. And here are annotations. This person said it could have been well organised. So these are people from other countries giving suggestions about how this draft might be improved for its final publication. Now I'm going to go back to the community now. This is the community. You can see over here, these case studies have been published. There's the Ghana case study, the Cameroon case study, the Nigeria case study. And in fact, if I go to our Ghana representative here, this is his LinkedIn page where this has been published on his LinkedIn page. So in the community, we're sharing this knowledge, which has been produced collaboratively, but this is knowledge that he's created. We're repositioning him as a knowledge creator. So that's the second area that I wanted to show you, this creator area. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk to you then about, okay, how do we design learning activities? And this is a thing that we call a learning module. So I've now jumped over to the bookstore. And in the bookstore is this learning module, which is a learning module which is produced by some based on some material from the Folks Now Business School here at the University of Illinois about group decision making. So look, we've got our videos in here. This is just set up stuff. So now we're getting into the composition problem. Who's in the team? Who do we enlist to in a group to solve a particular organisational problem? So we have our video in here, and we've got a little diagram about these different members. So, you know, if there's only a little bit of overlap, we're probably going to get a more productive team than one where there's a lot of overlap. So in other words, then people can really contribute their different opinions. We've got a little article about relationship science. Then we look at a video about the influence problem, and we discuss that. So what we do is, we make an update. Describe a real or imagined decision that your team or group and organisation might make. Bring some examples to bear. We're not going to lecture you in the video about this. We're going to ask you to post these things in the community and talk about them. The participation problem. How do you get everybody to contribute in a team? And so on. And then this is creating a process revolution. And this is their peer-reviewed project, where what they're going to do in their peer-reviewed project, and if I scroll down a little bit further, what they're going to do is they're going to develop a group decision-making protocol or strategy. How are you as a team? And they're going to peer review this. We're going to build this together and peer review it. Now, that's just an example of building this highly dialogical, highly interactive, and also, you know, positioning the learners as solving real in the workplace issues. These are people who are in teams, in workplaces, and we want them to be documenting a strategy they're going to actually apply in work, during work, for work. Now, this is where I'm going to this analytics area now, and in a way this is kind of important in several ways, which you're going to see. What we're doing is we're data mining all this activity. So we've got people who are interacting in community, we've got people who are doing peer-reviewed projects, and this here is an analysis, and this was actually an 8-week course, online course, and there were 30 or 40 people in it. But in fact, there was so much interaction that there were nearly 2,000 pieces of actionable feedback. And what we've been data mining is everything that happened, all the conversations, the different versions of the peer-reviewed works, all the things that people did. And there were actually, you know, we're data mining 500,000 data points in here. And everybody has one of these things, which is called an Astor plot. And our expectations as the instructors or the trainers or the professors or the teachers or whatever you want them to be, the circumference of the circle is our expectations. And I'm looking at the whole group now, but in fact, every person in the group had one of these for themselves. And this, for example, is the self-review percentage scored. This is the stuff that was published, which is the stuff that, as the instructor, I said, this was great, let's share this in the community as public knowledge. This here is the average percentage score through peer reviews. And I can click on any of these and have a rationale as to how this knowledge judgment is powerful and useful. So whether we call that knowledge judgment assessment or whether we call it the collaborative work of the knowledge community, it doesn't really matter. But what we're doing is we're building a judgment, and what we can do is we can go down beneath every one of these and see what we're measuring. Now, this is the very important part, which I've kind of left to last because I want to go on and develop this idea now. We've got 3 large things that we want to be looking at. Knowledge, which is stuff that you've learned, which is usable and actionable and worth learning. Focus, which is the effort you've put in and your motivation and your contribution to the knowledge work that you've been doing and doing with others. But this is very important too, which is help, which is we want to be measuring your individual contribution to a knowledge ecology, and we can do that in these environments. Now, as I say, this view that I have here is the whole group, right? But every single person in the group has their own view with the same metrics, and there's nothing that I can see about them that they can't see about themselves as well. So this is very, very important. And this, in a way, is an illustration of one of the values of computer-mediated environments, you could in a regular class never have organised 2,000 pieces of actionable feedback, which is one annotation on the work, a comment that somebody makes, or one peer review rating, or one comment that somebody's made on your post. So in fact, there were nearly 2,000 pieces of interaction in the group, which were actionable, which were contributing in a formative way to knowledge work. It wasn't assessment at the end, it was formative assessment along the way. And what we're doing is we're data mining that formative assessment at the end. We data mine it all the time. So when you start off, this is a 0, and you see it grow. Each of the petals in this aster plot, aster is a type of flower, they grow as you do more work and as you reach closer to the circumference of the circle, which is our learning or knowledge objectives as a group. Okay, so I'm going to just stop sharing that now, and I'm going to jump back out to my PowerPoint presentation, where I'm going to kind of draw some of this together and draw some conclusions about the future of work. So let me stop sharing now. Let me jump back to Zoom here, which is here. And what I'm going to do is share my screen again in the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so there we go, back to the PowerPoint. And look, this process is something that we call mastery learning. It's actually quite an old idea, but it's been around for 50-odd years, a phrase which was first coined by a very famous University of Chicago educator, Benjamin Bloom. And what the circumference of the circle is, it's a set of learning objectives. And everybody can reach those learning objectives. We don't have to say that some are going to succeed and some are going to fail because we've got a bell curve of success and failure. What we can do is we can say, look, some people may take longer to reach those learning objectives, those knowledge objectives, but with assistance from others and with support and seeing what other people are doing and being part of a collaborative knowledge ecology, everybody can reach that objective. And if you think of the classic bell curve of assessment, which is, you know, the people who do really well and the people in the middle and the people who don't do so well, we want to push that curve over. We want that curve to be one where everybody can succeed because we've provided them with these incremental feedback where they can just keep working at things until they reach that point of success. So I'm going to conclude now with a little analysis of what I'm calling some meta skills for digital working and learning ecologies. I'm going to go back to speaking in general terms. So in that diagram we just had, there was the knowledge sector, the help sector, the focus sector. So extending domain knowledge. In these environments, of course, we need domain knowledge. We need to understand about finance. We need to understand about coding. If we're offering medical care support, which was a growing area in the virtual economy. In fact, there's nothing that isn't in the almost nothing that isn't in the virtual economy these days in one way or another. So what we need to do is we need to have not individual memory, not the stuff that you can remember to give the right answers in the test, but we need social memory, which is the ability to look things up, to discover things. Digital literacy, data literacy, to make sense of data and to be able to interpret it effectively. So social memory is actually not the stuff which is between those ears. It's not the stuff that you can remember for the test. It's the capacity to find things out. It's the capacity to learn on the fly. And that leads to our second point, which is navigation, which is, you know, the places in which we work and the technologies in which we work and the domain knowledges that we have are constantly on the move these days. So we need to be able to navigate those changes, to be able to understand, kind of have mental models and mental maps about where to find things. And then we need to have this externalised personal memory, note-keeping, bookmarking. But in fact, what you saw happening in our communities back there was collaborative knowledge-making, where in fact the work of the community, the learning community, documenting things, writing things down, discussing things, becomes a form of memorisation, but externalized memory. It's not stuff in your head memory, it's stuff that you have, as a group, have documented and written down, and every now and then you're going to go back to that community or back to that peer-reviewed project that's now been published to the community, because it's an externalized memory, not just of your individual experience, but of the group learning, the group knowledge. The next point is about systems thinking. Now, there's a huge amount of stuff in the world, more than thinkable, manageable. So systems thinking, which is identifying meaning patterns, finding what's salient, building visual models, and perhaps sharing those models in the way that those diagrams that we saw do that. Problem solving. So this is using these spaces to solve problems and document the solutions to problems. And then scenario framing, thinking ahead, sense making, anticipating outcomes, negotiating change. So when our little group learning people there, they were developing a strategy about how they were going to do group learning, which is actually forward thinking. So this is all in the area that we would call domain knowledge. The second area is maintaining focus, which is orientation to work. That's, in a way, what I'm saying is these areas, focus, and I'm going to get to the green area help in a second, these are often neglected, but in fact they are every bit as important as domain knowledge. So, mindset, self-awareness, motivation, purpose. I mean, reflect on that, write about that, share your feelings about that with people. Build plans, be they your own personal to-do plans or group project designs. Do what I would call agile learning, work-embedded learning, taking initiative, incremental interventions, troubleshooting, learning from mistakes, empowerment, documenting and taking initiative and documenting success, meta-reflection, self-regulation, metacognition, self-efficacy. And in a way, what we need to do in our learning environments is make these things explicit. And then at the end of the day, what we have is something which is called capacities around persistence, which is grit, resilience, that you're going to have struggled your way through. Learning is a struggle, and actually explicitly stating that, articulating that struggle in a peer review, a self-review after a peer review, in the discussions in the community. Having that part of the discussion is pretty important as well. And finally, incredibly important is collaborative intelligence, which is how to give constructive feedback. So in the scholar space that I showed you now, we have this feedback area where you give peer-reviewed feedback, but there's feedback on feedback, where you can actually, people might say, look, that wasn't very helpful. And so maybe what we can do is we can learn about how to give constructive feedback, and emotional intelligence, how not to say things which are destructive, how to be critical without hurting somebody in a way which is counterproductive. Collective knowledge, sharing knowledge. All this knowledge is not just the stuff between your ears. It's stuff that in these kinds of environments, we've learned to build together and we've learned to share with each other. But the next point is tremendously important, which is a concept that we developed in Australia. And in fact, we wrote a book about this in workplace contexts with the title Productive Diversity. Is how one negotiates and derives value from the differences in the group. So, so often with teamwork, we hear about shared values and common mission and all this kind of stuff. That's often counterproductive. What we really want in a group is different ways of thinking about things which are productive in their interrelationships, productive for their very differences. So, in other words, in that discussion stream that we have in Scholar, when somebody makes a different comment and say, oh, I hadn't thought of that, that's more valuable than putting up your hand and having the right answer for the teacher. It's more valuable than getting the A, B, C, D answer right. And learning to build these ecologies of productive diversity is a skill which is incredibly important in today's workplaces. Knowledge ecology leadership, if you're an admin in one of these communities, but also how you can lead beside somebody, how you can lead somebody who's your peer, how to lead from behind, how to influence somebody who's an admin or a leader, and of course leading from the front. But also transferable soft skills. By doing this, you're learning how to interact effectively with clients. So important in these virtual environments are client relationships, trying to understand what the other person's thinking and feeling, what their needs are. And how to relate to stakeholders, how to relate productively in markets where diversity is the norm. So these are all things that we need to try to achieve, but what it does, it changes the role of the educator. The teacher becomes not the person who's out there on the stage or running the discussion in the traditional way, but they're the designer of learning ecologies. And if you like, they're a knowledge documentation and feedback manager, a knowledge facilitator in the context of the organisation, and a manager of collective intelligence. So I hope that's been an interesting and useful presentation. There are a couple of connections, my email address and a website and a Facebook page and a Twitter link as well. So I will now stop sharing, and I look forward to the discussion that will follow. Thanks very much, folks.